Well, good afternoon and welcome back to Turk's Fall Science Speak seminars. I'm hopeful that you're all well, and if you are in part of California that's now subject to a stay-at-home order, that the next hour will be the highlight of your day. My name is Jeff Schlatter, and I direct the UC Davis Tahoe Environmental Research Center, or TURC. To learn more about TURC, the research we conduct here and around the world, the public education we provide for the local and regional community, and our work with agencies here in the Tahoe Basin, please visit our website, tahoe.ucdavis.edu. You can also find out how to follow us on social media, how you can join in with our activities, and how to help support the work we do. One of the goals is to facilitate interaction, dialogue, and discussion. That was easier 9 months ago. But fortunately, we're all getting better with Zoom. So we'll be attempting to address your questions at the conclusion of today's presentation via the Q&A function on Zoom. So all you need to do is type in your questions or comments in Zoom, and then time permitting, we will be addressing those questions and comments. Don't try shouting out questions. Your microphones will be muted. And also we won't be monitoring the chat function. So Q&A is the way to do it. Before I introduce today's speaker, I wanted to say that our first winter Science Speak seminar will be on January 7th. And it's from the UC Davis Cannabis and Hemp Research Center. That center conducts cutting-edge cannabis and hemp research across multiple disciplines to advance knowledge about production, environmental and health impacts, testing, applications for use, and public policy. So if that's a subject that interests you, I urge you to join us again on January 7th. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jerry Braun, an energy technology generalist researching emerging energy supply options. He previously served as director of the California Renewable Energy Center at UC Davis and founded the California Integrated Renewable Energy Systems, CAL-IRES collaborative. Jerry advises and advocates for integrated planning and operation of local energy services in support of community, economic, and environmental goals. The title of today's presentation is on your screen, but I'm going to read it anyway. Local Renewable Energy Transition Planning and Climate Resilience. So now the hard part is I have to transfer control to Jerry. And so Jerry, take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. Hopefully folks can hear me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and I'm looking forward to some good comments and questions. By way of introduction, and I'm going to use some figures here that probably are unfamiliar, but we're a tenth of the way to decarbonizing the electricity sector globally, and it's taken about $3 trillion to get where we've gotten so far. So another 30 or so trillion, and we will be, at least in terms of electricity, no longer generating greenhouse gases. And doing this both in a centralized way and locally buys time as the climate clock ticks toward midnight. The thing that I am beginning to realize is how fast local renewable transitions can move, and I think they can outpace state and national programs, certainly in countries where the policies aren't aligned. In a lot of local areas and local cities and counties, the policies are aligned, but there's obviously work to do to get local areas doing things they've never done before. Fortunately, a lot of people and businesses are investing, and that helps a great deal. And one thing that's not widely understood is how much these investments really strengthen local economies. And they also, of course, lead to more resilient energy systems, which is a big need given the way climate change is affecting the weather. So I'm going to just briefly talk about what's going on globally and in the US and in California. Then I'm going to shift to talking about what cities and counties are doing. And then talk a little bit about the Tahoe area and what I've learned about climate action planning and the energy changes that are occurring in the Tahoe area. And finally, I'll offer some summary comments. In terms of the global transition, it's really ramping up, and it's ramped up really in a very short period of time. From this just shows what's happened from 2004 on, and it's almost like clockwork going up incrementally. And what is happening basically is that the scale economy, manufacturing scale economies in solar and wind, there's so many bits of equipment being produced on such a large scale that the costs have just plummeted, which is really good news. And it will the costs will continue to go down. But we also need to phase in those kind of scale economies in batteries and fuel cells, because they are going to be used for transportation and to decarbonize the transportation sector. And they are a good marriage with solar and wind, especially solar in terms of producing renewable hydrogen for fuel cells. Now that's the good news, but one caution is that only 40% of global energy is produced in the form of electricity. A bigger share is produced in the form of heat, and some of the heat is very high temperature, and it's very difficult to use things like heat pumps that can be used at low temperature heat delivery. Conversion it's very difficult to use those technologies to produce high temperature heat. So, and then in addition, 16% of the global energy is devoted to transport. So we need to do a big lift in electricity, and then about 2.5 times that amount to get to full decarbonization of all of the sectors: power, heat, and transport. There are things coming on stream, including biofuels and renewable hydrogen and renewable heat that are all essential complements to renewable electricity. So what is happening in the US? We are finally now, and it's just happened this year, at a point where the three relatively clean or totally clean energy sources, natural gas, wind, and solar for electricity, account for all of the capacity additions. That being said, be careful because there's a lot of existing capacity that isn't solar, wind, or natural gas, and that still needs to be dealt with. Solar and wind power are now more than 65% of the capacity additions, and reductions are occurring in coal and natural gas use for electricity production that are proportionate but not identical. California, I think probably you might assume, has the largest solar market in the United States, and in fact, it's probably pretty close to half the total for the whole country. And solar here now supplies more than 20% of California's electricity needs. how is that distributed in terms of size and in particular? You know, I'm sure that solar is, is mounted on people's roofs and on the roofs of buildings. It's also in that those are the two bottom bars, segments of the bars, the dark blue and yellow. Non-residential is pretty much just commercial buildings and parking lots and things like that. Utility PV, and this is solar. This is solar photovoltaics, which is the dominant share of solar electricity now. Utility scale solar is ramped up really fast, and now is pretty much half of the total in total additions in California. And the green area is concentrating solar power, which is a thermal conversion technology that also produces bulk electricity. What we're seeing, and it's kind of intuitive that it would be necessary, but when you get into the technical details, it's absolutely necessary that that further solar deployment be coupled with energy storage. Solar, as everybody knows, only happens part of the day, but we use electricity all day. And the electricity grid needs to be able to operate and deliver solar electricity 24/7. So battery storage is ramping up in all of the solar generation sectors, and the expectation is by 2025 we will have nearly 25% of solar installations will have battery storage. There's an important trend that has come up more or less as a component of what I was just talking about, and that is that corporations are investing now in non-residential solar installations. Some of the giant companies in the United States have goals to fully provide their electricity needs from solar. And then we're also seeing finally the progress toward what we call community solar. That is solar production that is in the community and available to people in the community, electricity customers who, for one reason or another, can't generate their own solar electricity. And it's a very important trend, especially in light of the need to supply clean energy to underserved communities. Does it make a difference in terms of, does local solar production make a difference in terms of reducing greenhouse gases? I thought this chart was quite interesting, that in states like California and Hawaii that have relatively moderate temperature, moderate weather, and are temperate climates typically, even as early as 5 or more years ago, the per capita electricity sales in California and Hawaii were bending over and going down simply because of the amount of solar being installed locally. And so this is something that will continue. And the real challenge, of course, is to be able to tackle the states where the per capita electricity sales are much higher. So now I'm going to turn to something that I said is kind of a under the radar consideration, and that is, we know that that property owners that install solar benefit significantly from doing so. They typically their installations are paid for within 10 years, and then the rest of the time, while they're still operating after that, they're essentially producing electricity that doesn't have to be paid for. But how do these investments, which are not being made by our energy utilities, how are these investments benefiting the communities, the local communities, and the local environment? And every community is different. I picked a couple. I live in Yolo County, and part of El Dorado County is in the Tahoe area, and it's very interesting that Yolo County's deployment of on-site solar capacity is about evenly split between residential and non-residential. That is, residential and commercial is another term. But in El Dorado County, it's 90% residential. And I don't have an explanation for that, but I suspect it is that in Yolo County, solar installations started up at a low level decades ago. And so, the industry that provides those services is a little, was able to ramp up a little bit faster and expand into larger scale projects. I'm going to talk about something that is really getting a lot of attention now locally. As in, there are a number of cities and counties in California that have, declared climate emergencies. And one thing that I think makes that very important is that 50% of the possible ways that you can decarbonize, the investments that you need to make, are actually locally actionable. When I talk about net zero carbon, I'm talking about basically all of the annual energy use for a building, for example, is actually met with on-site solar electricity, typically, and so that the annual production matches the annual usage. The photos are some projects that I've personally been involved in. Some of them as much as 20 years ago. So I just thought that's been a nice little collage to use to talk about this topic. Some of the things that energy users can do to get to net zero carbon in their own buildings. Certainly, you need to supply electricity, in particular, solar electricity on site, and again, match it to the current and future use. And basically, the key is to offset fuel use for space and water heating, which is now typically provided, covered by natural gas. And natural gas is, as you know, is a carbon-based fuel that, that needs to be not used if you want to get to net zero carbon. Water heating and space heating retrofits are the key. And also where it isn't possible to to do those retrofits or make changes other than just with appliances where where you can't do solar. Um, you can purchase 100% renewable electricity or 100% renewable natural gas. And then the next phase of net zero carbon is to decarbonize vehicles, which involves replacing gasoline and diesel vehicles with electric vehicles, both battery electric and fuel cell electric. And then because so much electricity and gas is being converted to cleaner and lower carbon commodities, the infrastructure that transports it needs to evolve along with the energy uses, and that means the potential for community microgrids, production of renewable natural gas locally, and also hydrogen from renewable electricity. Here's a table that I created based on statistics in my county to kind of give you an idea of what difference does it make to a local economy, to have a high uptake of solar on roofs and in the community. In Yolo County, we're literally the combined solar production of all of the individual homes and buildings and parking lots and so forth. It covers now 12% of countywide electricity use, and that's a fairly big number, and it's increasing fairly rapidly. It's actually was 9% when I first did this analysis, and it's up to 12% now. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but in the yellow highlighted boxes, what is happening is that we are avoiding importing high-priced electricity into our county and replacing it with electricity that is coming from people's roofs. And that's a big benefit to the local economy. Those are dollars that continue to recirculate locally rather than go away to pay for the imported electricity. But also we're creating jobs in a significant local solar deployment generates jobs, and the total value of those two things alone is close to twice the revenues of our community choice electricity company in Yolo County. It's a big number. Plus, the taxable property, the solar equipment is taxable if and when the building owner sells the property. It's not taxable initially, but it is taxable later on. So that benefit is a potential benefit, but it is quite large in terms of the amount of taxable property that is being generated as a result of solar deployment. There are other things that are harder to quantify. What is the value of having more solar so that more things can continue to function in the wake of a disaster? It's quite substantial. But it's hard. It's an analysis that is not. It requires a lot of assumptions. I think that's enough for this chart, except to mention that even more local solar capacity is going to be required than currently, as we begin to charge more electric vehicles from our buildings and from community-based charging centers. So I'm going to move to local energy, local renewable transitions, and just mention that there's been a lot of attempts to see, well, how much could local solar actually contribute? And the estimates in the past have been that in the early days were that, well, maybe 10 or 20% of the buildings could have solar on them. And, would that make much difference? More recently, we've done some work to kind of look using, Google Earth and other tools like that to see how much unshaded rooftop area is there in a community. And what we learned was that mounting solar panels on all or most of the unshaded and code compliant roof area in a typical California city would suffice to produce more electricity than the city's existing buildings use. So there's tremendous potential. Putting the panels on parking areas would add more potential. And then renewable heat and fuels also can be produced locally in quantities that match local heat and fuel use. So there's a lot that can be done locally. We don't have to rely totally on the statewide energy providers. It's quite possible to do a lot locally. And what I've talked about net zero, but the only reason to talk about net zero is as much as building owners are currently allowed to do. You can only install a solar array to match your historical electricity usage, rather than produce more energy than you use and have it delivered to other people. I think that has to change, but there's a lot of resistance to that from electric utilities. Producing more electricity that's shared locally really has a revenue impact on these utilities. But there's another very interesting aspect, which is in terms of carbon. There are certain processes that can be used to convert organic waste to fuel. Actually, are carbon negative in the sense that if those processes weren't applied, the organic materials would release methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, into the environment. And so by simply converting them to energy, these organic streams, there can be a great negative effect on greenhouse emissions. And then finally, and something that I don't plan to talk about here, but there is now starting to be a movement to recognize that the way we do industrial agriculture is really bad for the soil's ability to capture carbon and keep it in the ground. And so there's a lot of interest in what is called regenerative agriculture, taking farmland that has been degraded in terms of its carbon retention capability and getting it back to what it was before. So this is a somewhat busy chart, and I'm going to I'll probably not go into any detail, but we're not going to get to some of the best solutions immediately, but by starting with what we can do now, and that we are creating pathways to the things that will come in the future. Our natural gas infrastructure, transport infrastructure is quite capable of handling renewable natural gas, because renewable natural gas is simply natural gas that is produced from renewable materials, organic materials. But evolving the natural gas transport system so that it can also at this time accommodates a certain percentage of hydrogen, but not anything like the amounts we will need. So the natural gas system needs to evolve toward renewable hydrogen. On the electricity side, we're doing pretty well on, utility scale solar and on-site solar. Community solar has been really hard to get off the ground because of the way the electricity grid is regulated. Storage has been lagging, but it's starting to come up. And then ultimately, there's the opportunity to better integrate the energy storage that is contained in vehicles, and use it when they're not running around, as part of a building energy system, so that solar and storage can work together. So there, it's climate action planning needs to kind of start where you can and keep evolving, toward adopting better technologies, and they are in the pipeline. And I'm going to just basically this chart says, if we were able to decarbonize electricity and make electricity more resilient, we could double the effect by doing the same thing on the gas fuel side. And that kind of leads up to, and I'm not going to go into all of these things that can be done, but that leads up to, though, what can be done locally in the Tahoe area, in concert with energy utilities that serve the Tahoe area. I was delighted to discover that South Lake Tahoe has just adopted a climate action plan, and I would really compliment the city and the team that put the plan together. They did a really great job, and I really would commend to anybody's attention, if you want to get a better idea of what really can be done and hopefully will be done locally in your area. Take a look at that plan, and that's the good news. The not so good news is that climate action planning locally has been going on for 10 or more years, probably getting on to well, at least a decade, and it usually stops with the climate action plan, because there is no money budgeted to implement the policies that are in the climate action plan. That is something that cities and counties need to grapple with, and it's going to be maybe more difficult than ever because of the post-COVID economic situation. Many cities and counties are looking to lay off employees and slash their budgets. So we need strategies that will allow implementation of climate action plans, even though the budget, public sector budgets are going to be impacted. This is just a chart to give you an idea of roughly where the greenhouse gases are being produced locally. And it's typically the use of natural gas is one big thing. It produces carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas when you burn it. And of course, there's quite a lot of heating that needs to be done in a relatively cold part of California. Then also water and electricity and transportation are the other two big chunks. And so this is pretty typical, but that pie chart looks a little bit different from, and in some cases a lot different from one city to another. And I've talked about what can be done to, and the Climate Action Plan talks about what can be done. But basically, the key is reducing natural gas and transportation emissions by encouraging the adoption of heat pump appliances and electric vehicles. So just talk a bit about your energy providers. Liberty Utilities is the electricity provider in the Lake Tahoe area. It relies on electricity from power plants that burn coal and natural gas. It recently added solar to its generation portfolio because the state mandates that 30% or more of the electricity produced delivered by electric utilities is renewable electricity. And so Liberty Utilities is meeting standards, but as you can see in this, it's not clear at all from the public information available where the rest of the power is coming from. And I was able to kind of get a rough idea that it's definitely not renewables is just what California requires pretty much, and everything else is either fossil fuels or perhaps hydroelectric. Is it possible for the Tahoe area to aim higher? Well, it probably is. PG&E serves parts of the Placer and El Dorado counties outside the Tahoe area. They are, the carbon intensity of the electricity and that they purchase and deliver is about 50% lower than the California average. And also they have implemented a green tariff, for customers that a solar green tariff. That is, you can purchase solar electricity from PG&E if you can't generate it on your own property. So, and in terms of what's available in terms of incentives from Liberty Utilities, they have reserved some money for solar incentives in 2020. And the amounts are enough to offset 15 to 20% of the cost of a solar installation on your home. And that's, it's worth looking at. That's the good news. The bad news is that of the 2,000 solar companies operating in California, only 2 are operating in the Tahoe area. And that limits what can be done. And I hope there is some discussion of making it more attractive for companies to go into the solar installation business in all areas of the state, but particularly those that are in quotes underserved by the solar industry. Southwest Gas, incidentally, does not offer incentives for solar or space or solar water heating or space heating. However, the tax credits that apply to electricity are still fairly generous, and they also apply to both solar and gas heating systems. So the last thing I want to mention is that a lot can be done, that local governments can influence. But the truth is, almost all of the good news is related to homeowners and business owners just doing things in their own self-interest, which is basically installing rooftop solar in a lot of areas of California. Saves a lot of money over the life of the solar equipment. And so one thing that local governments can do is think harder about implementing the climate action plans they develop, and they certainly can help raise awareness of climate and renewable energy issues. And what we've found in our area is that we have a advocacy organization in Davis, California, that has been working for a decade or more, and they set goals. They don't have the resources to achieve the goals, but they set goals for the community, and what goals for recently doubling the amount of solar installations, doubling the amount of electric vehicles. You'll see down in the lower left corner, that the goal was 4,500 solar installations by 2020, and we're gonna meet that goal. So, just to recap, we're in a global renewable energy transition, but it's the sum of 500,000 local transitions, and we're about 10% of the way where we need to go. Well-integrated local solar is the best climate solution that in the climate action planning portfolio, but there are a lot more. Money for on-site solar, net zero buildings, and community solar is coming from businesses and people, and some from energy utilities. But in any event, everybody wins, including the investors, the local economies, and the environment. The thing that is now very much on the agenda is that public services need to be resilient as climate impacts start to impact us, and having pervasive local renewable deployment really helps that a lot in terms of keeping services going when in the wake of a disaster or problem. I mentioned net positive and net negative. Both are important. And just speeding up the transitions that are happening anyway should be the main focus of local climate action plans. Don't just plan, implement while planning. And it's real easy to say, we're going to have a plan, we're going to work on a plan. Do something while you're planning. So I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I especially want to thank Heather for some very good suggestions on these slides, and also give a shout out to my talented and wonderful daughter, Melissa Guthrie, who is a Tahoe resident and who suggested this presentation.
Thank you, Jerry. That was great. We have some questions that have been sent in through the Q&A function, and just a reminder for other people who have questions or comments, please use the Q&A to send those in. So Jerry, for the first one, for those of us with e-vehicles, when will V2H and V2G systems, that for people who aren't familiar with those terms, that's vehicle to home and vehicle to grid systems, when will they be commercially available to the residential market? And what are the factors holding up this efficient use of lithium batteries?
That's a great question. And and I unfortunately my crystal ball doesn't really work well on that topic, because it's, you know, I look at it from an engineering perspective. It's certainly feasible now, and in fact, some of the vehicles have the necessary software in them to make it possible. I think there are two reasons why there's hesitation. First of all, the electric vehicles are not exactly pervasive yet, and so the policy tends to follow action. I really think that it's on the policy agenda, but it's not very high to, you know, change the rules and change particularly the electricity interconnection rules that would allow it. But there's also a hesitation on the part of the vehicle manufacturers. They warrant they provide warranties for their vehicle and for all of the equipment in it, including the batteries. And if the batteries were used more and for different purposes than they are warranted for purely transportation uses, that would complicate their, that could add costs, that could cause issues for them. So I think there's a lot to be worked out. And as I said, as electric vehicles become more prevalent, I think it's just kind of a, say in the next 5 years, there's going to be enough need for that storage capacity to engage it in support of the grid, in support of the electricity grid, that I think that some of the roadblocks will be removed, but I can't say when.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. Actually, the next question is from Yolo County, so this should be easy for you. Actually, it's a question and a comment. So it relates to the conflict between renewable energy and agricultural land. So in Winters, which is just west of Davis, there's a large solar facility located on prime agricultural land. The energy generated is used for the city of Winters. So orchards, which previously sequestered carbon, were removed to make way for these solar panels. The agricultural land that has been removed, from production for 30 plus years. So I guess the question is, should county planning allow agricultural land to be lost for this purpose? And the comment is that she thinks the city should generate its own energy on its own land, for example, rooftops. So I guess before you comment on that, Jerry, I'd like to insert a comment here. So one of the things I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years is a concept of floating photovoltaics. So this is where large arrays of photovoltaics are put out on reservoirs. So reservoirs are basically the land has been lost to agriculture where the water sits. And often you have the transmission lines that are actually there for hydroelectricity to be transported. Just a back of the envelope calculation I did was for Hoover Dam, for Lake Mead behind it. If you covered something like 5% of Lake Mead with floating solar voltaics, you would have the same generating capacity that Hoover Dam currently provides. So that's my comment. Jerry, please take over.
Well, I'll just add a couple of things. Certainly the floating solar, it's been a concept for decades, and it's finally being put into practice. And I think it is a great idea. Um, uh, the agricultural land issue is something that I know that I serve on the advisory committee for our community choice agency, which basically procures power from, in order to resell it and in order to have more renewable electricity available in our communities in Yolo County. And one of Valley Clean Energy's policies is that we will not purchase electricity from projects that are built on prime agricultural land. So it is a question, I think, of the purchaser of the power having, making a decision on what matters, whether it matters where the power is generated and how it's generated and what are the environmental impacts. I think it's, I'm guessing that, the environmental reviews that the state requires may not preclude something that a city or county would say, I don't want to be involved in that. So that's the only comment I can make, really.
Okay, thanks. I guess maybe a simpler question, or at least one that's a simpler answer for you, Jerry. It relates to storage from solar panels. Could you say a little bit more about improvements by way of the new efficient inverters and battery systems that are being used for storing energy from solar systems?
Yes, really, we are the solar industry and solar energy in general is very fortunate to have happening in the transportation sector what has allowed solar to suddenly become not just cost competitive, but the best deal you can get. And that is, as I mentioned earlier, because the manufacturing of batteries was scaled up significantly just for computers, made it possible that for their costs to be plausible for vehicles. Now that vehicles with batteries in them are being produced in much higher volumes, that's driving the cost down. And so, the timing is actually just extremely fortunate. The battery storage is affordable, for coupling with solar, whether on large projects or small projects, because it has economic value in that configuration. The problem really is not the economics. The costs are good. The problem is that the regulatory systems haven't caught up. And what can you do where, and what are the safety issues and things like that. So I think that the technology is in good shape, the economics are in good shape, but the kind of the business environment, the business structure is not quite there yet.
So here's I guess, a follow-up economic question relating to the low price of oil that we currently have. And they're asking what renewable will be the first to be able to compete with fossil fuels at the current prices, or has this already happened?
It's from a purely energy basis, it's already happened. But what is often overlooked is that the cost of delivering energy is only partly the cost of supply. For example, it used to be that electricity, the cost of producing the electricity was the main thing, and perhaps 70% of the total cost. It's now 70% of the total cost is transporting the electricity, and the cost of supply of producing it is very low. And for fuels, that's also true. Natural gas is extremely cheap at the wellhead. It costs probably 5 or more times the cost of production at the at the meter on a home. So you have to think about not just the cost of producing the energy, but also getting it to where it's going. And that is a major, so I would encourage us to think in terms of what is the total cost of a particular energy source at the point of use versus how much does it cost, at the power plant site or at the wellhead. I don't know whether that helps or not.
Well, it helped me. So that's a start. The next question is a tricky one, in my opinion, anyway. So the questioner works over a high transmissivity sole source aquifer, where heat pump technologies are in question due to the need for aquifer protection. How is Tahoe addressing the potential of heat pumps to impact water quality in aquifers?
I'm not sure I am completely getting the context of that question. I think it might relate to ground source heat pumps.
Yeah.
In other words, one very good solution for heat pumps, especially in the Tahoe area, where the air temperature can get very cold, is to draw the heat not out of the air, not out of the cold air, but out of the relatively warmer ground. Well, when you do that, of course, you are heating up the ground and the water in it, I'm sorry, you're cooling it. But then if you're air conditioning, you're heating it. I don't know if there have been any serious studies of how that affects the nearby environment. I would think it's very minimal, on a residential scale, but it might be significant on a large scale.
Okay, thank you. And I should add that at the Tahoe Center for Environmental Sciences, we do have a heat pump system that does use both the cool air and the warmer ground temperature to drive our heating and cooling systems. But that facility is now was currently closed to the public.
Oh, okay.
Interesting question. What percentage of solar panels installed in California are made in China or other countries? And how might that be impacted by current US-China trade tariffs, et cetera?
That's a good question. Also, another hard question. There was kind of a hiccup a year or so ago, or maybe more, where literally the tariff problem was really hurting the U.S. solar industry, and that's kind of been ironed out. I mean, reality is that the U.S. doesn't come anywhere close to producing the solar panels that it uses. It at one time did, but that was about 20 or 30 years ago. And I guess the comment I would make is that it is a global market, and there are other countries that do produce large quantities of solar panels. It turns out that the technology to produce solar panels is really not that tough to implement. And so, if there were a major problem, I think the U.S. could easily respond to it.
Okay, so I guess one question related to that. What solutions are being offered to deal with the large amounts of hazardous waste that will be created when we start disposing of older solar panels?
That's a great question. There is actually, I was involved in the solar manufacturing industry when the issue was really active, and it was active because of panels that include hazardous materials. Most of the hazardous materials on most of the panels that are produced have been eliminated. There's no lead solder used in producing solar panels anymore. So the disposal problem, if it were a disposal problem, is not very tricky. But the materials recovery is something that probably isn't set up on a good basis, nor nor collecting the materials. The companies that manufacture solar panels say that they will take the panels back when they're at the end of life, but it's pretty easy to say in an industry where companies don't last as long as the panels. So there's a serious issue, and I don't see a whole lot of environmental regulation focused on it right now, even in California. It is an issue also for turbine blades, by the way, wind turbine blades. In fact, I was just on a call with a company that is actually working on how they can reprocess turbine blades, wind turbine blades, and use the materials to make concrete that is less carbon, that produces less greenhouse gases than the conventional ways of producing concrete. So I think there are solutions, but it's not something that has really popped up, given that the panels have a 30-year lifetime, and it's only been 10 years that we've had this huge increase in production.
Okay, so we're past 1 p.m. and so sadly we're going to have to wrap this up. We still have another dozen questions or so. If it's okay with you, Jerry, maybe Heather can collect those and send them on to you, and you could communicate one-on-one with those people. Okay.
That sounds good.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Heather. I wanted to once again thank you, Jerry, for taking the time to share your expert knowledge with all of us. So I wanted to thank our audience for joining in. Hope you learned a lot, and hope you're back again in January for our next seminar. So everybody have a good afternoon. Stay at home if you're in California, and be responsible if you're in Nevada.
Thank you.